If you recall, in the last interview I did with Dr. Athena Trakadas, as part of our mini-series that addresses maritime cultural heritage and climate threat, Athena mentioned this programme in the context of the Ocean Decade. So I thought I'd speak to Georgia and find out more about the Cultural Heritage Framework programme. So, Georgia, it's great. Thank you so much for finding time to join me on the Dive and Dig podcast. This is, as you know, I think, we're on the third one now in a series that's trying to sort of highlight the challenges, the climate challenges that we face, in particular with regard to, obviously, maritime cultural heritage. And I know that you're working under the umbrella of the Ocean Decade, and you head up something, and I always get this wrong, the Cultural Heritage Framework Programme, acronym CHFP. And listeners, if I get that in the wrong order, that's because I'm dyslexic. So this is really what I'd like to talk about today. I was speaking to Athena earlier, and she was telling me about this program, but it's amazing. It's the only cultural heritage program in the whole of the Ocean Decade system, as I understand it. So, what does it do? How does it work?
So, yes, you're right. The Cultural Heritage Framework Programme, CHFP, which I know is a mouthful, so I will continue with CHFP for the rest of it, is all about integrating marine cultural heritage into the Ocean Decade, which I'm sure, as you've been talking to Athena, you'll know that this is something that has been a struggle for a very long time, and not just within the Ocean Decade, but within the representation of cultural heritage in the ocean sciences themselves. So while ODHN, which is where Athena is looking at kind of high level stuff and policy and integrating cultural heritage from there, the Cultural Heritage Framework Programme really provides the examples, provides the meat, looks at all the different projects that are working all over the world, from the bottom up, from various different levels. Some projects which are by universities, some are NGOs, some are Indigenous or local community led. We take all of these projects and we build them into one network and then showcase them to the Ocean Decade.
I mean, that is really interesting, and it's really nice to be able to demonstrate, isn't it, through example. So how do you identify, and I think the word is endorse, isn't it? How do you make those connections, and how do you support these different groups or projects or whatever, however they manifest?
So it's a bit of a mix. It's quite a job to source all of these projects because there's so many all over the world who are doing incredible work in engaging with cultural heritage and ocean sciences and sustainability and climate change and the Ocean Decade. So it's a mix of us searching for these projects and also projects finding us through the Ocean Decade. And what happens, as you say, is they will become endorsed. So we will talk to a project and start off the endorsement process. And that then goes through an application, which goes through the decade, through us, and then eventually, hopefully, becomes endorsed. And once it is endorsed, it joins our network, it joins the Ocean Decade, and it has access to all of these different aspects of the decade, like different types of training, networking, engaging with each other, engaging with different stakeholders, stuff like that.
Wow, that's really, really brilliant, isn't it? Ignorantly, I didn't realise that those, I was about to say, well, what are the advantages of being endorsed? But clearly there are many. And presumably when you're working, particularly with, I imagine some of these groups are quite isolated, physically and in terms of the global network, this is a massive resource and support that you provide.
It's great. And I think that the benefits of endorsement are somewhat twofold. So you have the benefit of being part of this massive Ocean Decade community. But then also part of CHFP, part of what we do is really work quite intimately with the projects to get some of the goals happening that we want to see within the Ocean Decade for cultural heritage. So, for example, we have a number of projects which work with intangible cultural heritage, so things like Indigenous knowledge or practice, and we work with these projects to make sure that they are represented properly in the Ocean Decade and ethically and equitably, which is something that's really quite difficult and complex to organize and make happen. So yeah, there's lots of kind of different benefits, but we work together as a team to try and represent all of the different aspects of marine cultural heritage and then translate that to what's relevant in the decade itself.
I've got two questions. One is, you're based in Edinburgh, in the University of Edinburgh, and so you're leading on the CHFP, but you're indicating you've got people that support you in this. How big is the CHFP team then?
So we are a team that is firstly, so we're funded by the Lloyd's Register Foundation. It was Athena and Anthony Firth who wrote the grant and who came up with it. So they have a lot of input, of course, still on this. And on behalf of ODHN, Edinburgh manage and run the grant. So that is myself. Also, I'm overseen by Professor John Henderson at the University of Edinburgh. And we also have a fabulous team that work with us, which particularly run one aspect of CHFP, which is the CHFP magazine called SeaVoice, of early career researchers who work in heritage and biology and geosciences. We have 4 women who work with us from PhD all the way to undergraduate level.
Wow, that's brilliant. So you're really cross-cutting even, sort of globally with different experiences, with different expertise and disciplines. That's really interesting. So I really would love to talk about SeaVoice because I've had a look at it and it's just beautiful. It's wonderful, and I'm sure our listeners would like to hear more about it. But could you just give me an example of how one project maybe where you brought these different groups, you've endorsed them, and then, I don't know, through their own efforts and the support that's provided, have achieved, in your mind anyway, what you feel is a success?
Yeah, I think it's a great question actually, and there's loads of examples of these projects kind of working individually but also in groups within CHFP. So something that we are just starting actually, which I'm quite excited about, is different clusters within our own network. We now have enough projects that we have so many different people, some working on, some very hardcore archaeology all the way to, as we're talking about, intangible heritage and ocean literacy and things like that. So we've got a group now working together for Indigenous communities and Indigenous cultural heritage and how that can be better represented within the decade. And we're actually writing up a blue paper with some of the communities that we work with, aimed at the ocean decade, as to how to better integrate them and how we can provide more resources for them, how funding needs to change, but from the perspective of the communities themselves. So that's something that I'm really, really excited about and has come from CHFP working together and the projects all meeting each other.
God, that really is so important, because we're all, we've been on the co-creation bottom up, I guess I'm put my in parentheses now, bandwagon for a while, but that sounds like it's really generating the results that you need to be thinking about the real needs and integrating things properly. I really look forward to reading that. That sounds brilliant. So let's talk about SeaVoice. I keep calling it SeaVoices, but Danny's told me it's SeaVoice. And it looks, visually, so it's basically a magazine, but it's online, as I understand it. Maybe you could just explain to the listeners how SeaVoice works.
Sure. So SeaVoice is an online magazine, but we are actually now doing print as well, which is really exciting. It came from a lot of the work that we do, and particularly a lot of the work that I was doing pre-CHFP and during CHFP as well, has been working with coastal communities all over the place, from my home in Scotland to Mozambique to the Philippines. And part of that work has all been about including coastal communities in marine conservation, including cultural heritage and conservation. But what we were seeing was that these voices weren't really being heard on a bigger stage, and not just in policy, but also in the general public, in conservation, a lot of the work that was happening was very local, which is great, but it wasn't getting to a bigger stage.